The scream of the 8-year-old girl ripped through the quiet afternoon in front of 47 Maple Street. At the exact moment Nathan Reynolds stepped out of a taxi after 3 years away from the battlefield in Afghanistan. The sound sent a chill through his entire body. "Shut up. Bad children need to be punished." A rough, low male voice came from inside the house, from his house, and it was aimed straight at his daughter. The taxi pulled up in front of the gate at 47 Maple Street, where the late afternoon sunlight cast a golden glow over the maple trees. Nathan Reynolds pushed open the car door and took a deep breath of the familiar city air after 3 years away. His heart beat faster as he thought of the moment he would finally hold Lily in his arms, his little daughter, now 8 years old, whom he had missed every single second on the battlefield. But that joy lasted exactly 3 steps. A piercing scream tore through the peaceful air. Lily's voice, the clear, beloved voice of his daughter, was trembling with desperation. "Don't. I'm scared. Please don't come near me." Nathan froze as if turned to stone. The combat instincts forged over 3 years in Afghanistan exploded to life. A rough, low male voice barked back from the second floor. "Have you learned your lesson yet?" No hesitation. No thought. Nathan charged toward the front door like a missile. Locked, he stepped back, focused all his strength into his shoulder, and slammed into it. The wood groaned, the hinges burst free. Nathan raced upstairs at an impossible speed. Lily's bedroom, the door ajar, and the sight before him made his blood boil in every cell of his body. A tall man in a black t-shirt stood looming over Lily. The little girl was curled up in the corner of the bed, tears streaming down her cheeks. And the man, Brandon, as Nathan would later learn his name, had his hand raised, ready to stay away from my daughter. Nathan didn't remember how he moved. He only knew that in the blink of an eye, he was between them, gripping Brandon's wrist and twisting, hurling him away from Lily. Brandon staggered, slammed hard into the wall, blood spilling from the corner of his mouth. "What the hell?" Brandon growled, struggling to get back up. "Dad." Lily's voice shook, hardly daring to believe. Nathan never took his eyes off Brandon, his voice cold as ice. "Try moving again. Go ahead." One hand was raised like a shield in front of his daughter, the other clenched into a fist. Brandon stared at him, fear flashing briefly in his eyes before turning into fury. "Who are you? You dare break into my house?" "My house?" Nathan stepped closer, emphasizing every word. "This is my daughter, and you are not allowed to lay a hand on her." The tension reached its breaking point. Brandon glanced down at the blood on his hand, then back at Nathan, the man with the steely eyes of a warrior. He understood immediately. This was not someone he could take on. Police sirens wailed from the street outside. Someone had called. Nathan did not move, standing like a fortress between his daughter and the threat. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. "Police! Nobody move!" 2 officers rushed into the room. One quickly restrained Brandon, while the other looked at Nathan, assessing the situation. Nathan slowly unclenched his fist and turned back toward Lily. She was still sitting curled up, her wide eyes slowly lighting up as she recognized the man in front of her. "Dad, is it really you?" Nathan dropped to his knees and opened his arms. Lily threw herself into him, clinging tightly as if afraid he might disappear. Her small body trembled in waves. Nathan gently stroked her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm home, sweetheart. I'm home." The bedroom door flew open. Emma, his ex-wife, rushed in, her face pale. She stopped short when she saw Nathan, guilt and shock mingling in her eyes. Brandon, now in handcuffs, was dragged out by the police. He turned back and snarled, "You'll regret this, Emma." But Emma stood frozen, hands covering her face, tears streaming down. She couldn't bring herself to look at Nathan, or at Lily. Nathan stood up, lifting his daughter into his arms and letting her rest her head against his shoulder. He turned to Emma, his voice low, no longer angry but resolute. "From now on, no one will ever hurt my child again." The afternoon sunlight streamed through the window, casting a bright band across the floor. A new chapter had begun, a turbulent one, but Nathan knew one thing for certain. He was back, and this time, he would never leave his daughter again. Lily clutched the collar of his shirt and whispered, "I was so scared, Dad." "I know, sweetheart, but I'm here now." Nathan kissed the top of her head softly. "And I'll always be here." The fluorescent lights in the police station made everything look washed out and pale. Nathan sat on a hard plastic chair, still holding tightly to Lily's small hand. The little girl was silent, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if trying to escape the reality in front of her. Officer Barnes, a middle-aged woman with a gentle voice, sat across from them, a notebook open in front of her. "Mr. Reynolds, I need to record everything that happened. Can you tell me from the beginning?" Nathan nodded, his voice low and steady. "I just got back after 3 years of military service. I wanted to surprise my daughter. But when I reached the front door, I heard my child crying for help." His voice caught. Lily squeezed her father's hand more tightly. Barnes wrote carefully, then turned her attention to Emma, who was sitting in the far corner of the room, her face pale. A thick wall of silence stood between the two of them. "Mrs. Reynolds, who is Brandon Walsh to your family?" Emma swallowed, her voice trembling. He's my boyfriend. We've been seeing each other for 6 months." Nathan turned to look at his ex-wife, something inside him shattering. 6 months. While he had been sending letters home, still thinking of the home waiting for him, Emma had opened the door and let a stranger into Lily's life. "And has he ever behaved roughly toward your daughter before?" Barnes asked. Emma lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. The answer was in that silence. The next place Nathan took Lily was Dr. Carter's clinic. The small examination room was fully equipped, the faint smell of antiseptic lingering in the air. Lily sat on the exam table, her little legs dangling, not quite reaching the floor. Dr. Carter, a grey-haired man with a kind face, gently rolled up Lily's sleeve. Nathan stood beside her, his heart pounding heavily as bruises came clearly into view on his daughter's arm. "How long has it hurt here?" the doctor asked softly. Lily glanced at Nathan, then whispered, I don't remember. "A week? 2 weeks? Longer?" Her voice was barely audible. "Doctor," Carter made notes in the chart, his expression grave. He turned to Nathan. "These bruises aren't recent. There are older marks that have already faded. She's been under stress for quite some time." It felt as though someone was squeezing Nathan's heart. For 3 years, while he had been fighting far away, believing he was protecting his family, his daughter had been enduring hardship right at home. "Did you tell your mother about this?" the doctor asked. Lily shook her head, tears falling again. Nathan knelt down and looked into her eyes. "Why didn't you tell Mum?" Because Mum told me I had to be polite to Uncle Brandon. She said he was a good person." Nathan's world tilted. Emma hadn't just stayed silent, she had forced their child to accept something that was wrong. His hands trembled, not from anger, but from pain. Night fell over the house at 47 Maple Street. Nathan had tidied up and put Lily to bed. She clutched her stuffed bear, the gift he had sent from Afghanistan, her eyes closed tightly, yet her hand still gripping his. "You're not going to leave, are you, Dad?" Lily murmured sleepily. "No, sweetheart. I'm here, right beside you." When Lily's breathing became steady, Nathan slowly slipped his hand free and stepped into the hallway. He leaned against the wall and slid down to sit on the cold wooden floor. This house, once their home, now felt like an empty shell. In the moonlight filtering through the window, Nathan looked down at his hands that had once held a rifle, that had protected his fellow soldiers on the battlefield, yet had failed to protect what mattered most, his own daughter. Tears suddenly welled up, not tears of anger, but tears of regret and deep, aching pain. For the first time in 3 years, Nathan let his emotions take over. He cried for the years he had been gone, for the pain his daughter had endured, for the collapse of a family. The phone rang. Emma. Nathan looked at the screen but didn't answer. Not now. Not when everything still hurt too much. Outside the window, the night wind stirred the tree branches. The room was silent, but inside Nathan, a new resolve was taking shape. He couldn't change the past, but the future he would build with his own hands for his daughter. The enemy wasn't just Brandon, not just Emma. It was an entire system of deception, silence, and wrong choices that had forced Lily to suffer. And now Nathan knew this clearly. His true battlefield was not Afghanistan. It was right here, in this house, where he needed to rebuild trust and love for his daughter. He took a deep breath and wiped away his tears. Tomorrow would be a new beginning. Tomorrow, he would fight not with force, but with love and perseverance. Because Lily deserved nothing less. The next morning, sunlight poured warmly through the kitchen window, but Nathan had no mood to enjoy it. He sat at the old wooden table, his laptop open in front of him, along with several sheets of hastily written notes. Lily was still sleeping soundly upstairs, the first peaceful sleep she had had in many nights. The doorbell rang. Nathan stood up and opened the door. A woman in her early 40s stood on the porch, dressed in an elegant grey suit, her hair neatly pinned up, a high-quality leather briefcase in hand. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Carmina Hubert." Her voice was both professional and warm. Nathan nodded and invited her inside. Carmina looked around the house carefully, as if assessing every small detail. "I've reviewed the preliminary report provided by the police," Carmina said as they sat down at the table. "Your case is quite clear, but we need to act quickly." Nathan nodded. "I want custody. Immediately." "I understand." Carmina opened her briefcase and took out a stack of documents. "We'll file for emergency temporary custody. With the medical evidence and the police statements, I believe the court will rule in your favor." She paused and looked at Nathan. "But you need to be prepared." Emma may push back. She may argue that your 3-year absence makes you less than an ideal choice for Lily. Nathan clenched his hands. 3 years. 3 years of serving his country, believing he was doing the right thing only for that very sacrifice to potentially be used against him. "So what do we need to win?" His voice was calm, controlled the voice of a warrior accustomed to facing adversity. Carmina smiled faintly, clearly appreciating his resolve. "We need to prove 3 things. First, that you are capable of caring for Lily financially, emotionally, and physically. Second, that Emma failed to protect her daughter from a harmful environment. Third, that staying with you is in Lily's best interest for her overall development." Nathan listened closely, taking careful notes. This was no longer about emotion. This was strategy. And he trained to plan and execute, knew exactly what that meant. "What about Brandon Walsh?" Nathan asked. "I want to know who he is." Carmina flipped through several pages. "I ran a preliminary background check. Brandon Walsh, 32 years old, works at a mechanical repair shop. No serious criminal record, but there have been a few warnings for disorderly conduct in public." "That's all? So far? But that doesn't mean he's harmless." Carmina met Nathan's eyes. "Some people are very good at hiding who they really are." Nathan nodded. He understood that all too well. On the battlefield, the enemy never revealed their intentions until it was too late. 2 hours later, the kitchen table had become a small command center. Legal documents were stacked neatly on the left. A city map marked with key locations: Emma's house, Brandon's workplace, Lily's school lay carefully annotated on the right. The laptop was open to public records as Nathan searched for every scrap of information he could find on Brandon Walsh. Carmina sat across from him, typing rapidly on her phone. "I've contacted the court. An emergency hearing has been scheduled for next Monday. You have 7 days to prepare." 7 days, Nathan repeated, his eyes never leaving the screen. "That's enough." Carmina looked at him, a mix of surprise and admiration in her expression. "You're very calm, Mr. Reynolds. Most of my clients in situations like this are far more panicked." Nathan looked up. "I've been through worse, but nothing more important than this." He paused, his voice lowering. "My daughter needs me, and this time, I won't let her down." Carmina nodded and stood up. "Then we begin. First, I'll need a full financial disclosure. I need to know your savings, expected income, and your ability to cover Lily's expenses. I have a military pension, and I've secured a position with a local security firm. They give priority to veterans." "Good. Send me the employment contract." Carmina made a quick note. "Next, the living environment. This house needs to be shown as safe and suitable for an 8-year-old child." Nathan looked around. The house was old, but still warm. Lily's room was intact, though a bit cluttered. "I'll clean up, fix whatever needs fixing." "And finally," Carmina paused, her expression serious, "you need to demonstrate your ability to support Lily emotionally. She's been through trauma. The court needs to see that you understand that and have a plan to help her heal." Nathan nodded. "I'll find a child psychologist for her." "Exactly," Carmina smiled. "You're a fast learner." After Carmina left, Nathan remained alone in the kitchen. The sunlight had shifted to the pale gold of early afternoon. He looked down at the papers in front of him, each page another step in his battle plan. Emotions? He had set them aside. Anger at Emma? Hatred toward Brandon? None of that mattered as much as the final objective, protecting Lily. Soft footsteps sounded on the stairs. Lily appeared, her hair tousled, still bearing the traces of deep sleep. She stood in the kitchen doorway, looking at her father with a puzzled expression. "What are you doing, Dad?" Nathan turned and smiled warmly, the one smile he saved just for her. "I'm getting ready to make sure you stay with me, sweetheart." Lily stepped closer and looked at the pile of papers. That's a lot of papers. Yes, but every one of them is a promise from me to you. Nathan took her hand. I promise to keep you safe. I promise to always be here, and I promise to do everything I can to make you happy. Lily looked up at him, hope shining in her eyes, something that had been missing for far too long. I believe you. And with those words, Nathan knew there was no turning back. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was ready. Because this wasn't just a legal battle. It was a fight for his daughter's future. And Nathan Reynolds had never walked away from a fight. On Wednesday morning, while Lily was drawing in the living room, under the supervision of their neighbor Martha, a kind woman who had volunteered to help Nathan, sat in the small study, opened his laptop, and began to act. The first email went to the Human Resources Department of Precision Mechanics, the company where Brandon worked. Nathan attached Lily's medical report, a copy of the police record, and a brief, factual description of what had happened. There was no emotional language, only the facts, cold, clear, and precise. Dear Management of Precision Mechanics, I am writing to inform you of the conduct of your employee, Brandon Walsh, toward my 8-year-old daughter. Attached are documents substantiating the incident that occurred at my residence on December 24. I believe it is important for your company to be aware of this matter in order to reassess Ms. Walsh's suitability for a professional work environment. Sincerely, Nathan Reynolds. His finger pressed the send button without hesitation. 12 hours later, Nathan's phone rang. An unfamiliar number. He answered. This is Reynolds. The man on the other end of the line sounded shaken, furious. What the hell did you do? I just lost my job. You had no right. Nathan recognized the voice immediately. Brandon Walsh. His reply was icy. I have every right to protect my daughter, and you should be grateful that this is all I did. You'll regret this. Nathan hung up. There was nothing more to hear. The first step had worked. The next step was more complicated but even more necessary. Nathan opened the contact list for Oakwood Elementary, where Lily attended school. He had obtained it through the Parents Association, which he had once been part of before his deployment. Now, that list became a tool. He composed a new email, more carefully worded, but no less firm. Dear Parents and Administration of Oakwood Elementary, my name is Nathan Reynolds, father of Lily Reynolds in Class 3A. I am writing to share a serious situation regarding my daughter's safety over the past period of time. Lily has endured distressing experiences due to inappropriate behavior by an individual known to her mother. I possess full medical and legal documentation to substantiate this. What pains me most, however, is that Lily's mother, Emma Reynolds, failed to recognize or prevent what was happening in time. I am not sharing this to create alarm, but to ensure that our community, the place where our children are growing up, remains safe and trustworthy. I hope for your understanding and support in the coming days as Lily returns to school. Sincerely, Nathan Reynolds. This time, his hand paused over the send button. This was a point of no return. Emma would be isolated. Her reputation would be shaken. But Nathan looked out the window, where Lily was giggling at her own colorful drawings. That smile, the smile he had not seen since returning home, was the only answer he needed. He pressed the button. The email went out to more than 100 recipients. That evening, after Lily had fallen into a deep sleep, Nathan's phone began ringing non-stop. This time, it was Emma. He looked at the screen, hesitated briefly, then answered, Nathan, what are you doing? Emma's voice was choked, trembling. Everyone, they're looking at me like I'm... Like what? Nathan asked flatly. Like a mother who failed to protect her own child? You don't understand. I didn't know Brandon would. You didn't know? Nathan cut in, his voice rising for the first time. You didn't know when your daughter had bruises? When she was terrified every time she came home? Or did you simply not want to know? Silence on the other end, only ragged breathing and muffled sobs. Nathan, please, don't do this. I'm Lily's mother. I have the right. The right? Nathan's voice turned ice cold. You gave up that right the moment you let a stranger into your home and allowed your child to suffer. I'll fix things. I promise. Just give me one chance. Nathan closed his eyes. The image of Lily curled up in the corner of her bed rose vividly in his mind. He opened them again, his voice firm and final. Your chance ended the moment you stayed silent about what was happening to your child. Now you have one choice. Cooperate with me in the custody case, or face me in court. Decide. Nathan, don't. He ended the call. His hand trembled slightly, not from regret, but from knowing he had crossed a line, the line between protection and retaliation. In this case, the two were nearly indistinguishable. 2 days later, Nathan received an email from an old military friend, Marcus, now working as a private investigator. Marcus had dug deeper into Brandon's past. "Nathan, I found some things. Brandon Walsh hasn't caused trouble just once. There were 2 prior complaints of similar behavior in previous relationships, but no one pursued legal action. The records were cleared due to the statute of limitations. However, I have statements from people close to the victims. If you need them, I can provide everything." Nathan read the message, feeling both anger and grim satisfaction. Brandon wasn't someone who had made a single mistake. He was someone with a pattern, and now, that pattern had stopped. "At least with Lily," Nathan replied. "Thank you. Hold on to everything. I'll need it." He shut down the laptop, stood up, and walked into the living room. Lily was asleep on the couch, her stuffed bear clutched tightly in her arms. Nathan sat beside her and gently stroked her hair. Some people would call him cruel, others would say he had gone too far. But in Nathan's eyes, everything he had done served one purpose alone: to ensure that his daughter would never be afraid again. And if achieving that meant he had to play the role of the villain in Emma's eyes, in Brandon's eyes, even in the eyes of some acquaintances, then he was willing to do it. The Jefferson County family court was nothing like it appeared in the movies. It was simply a 3-story red brick building, with narrow hallways and the stale smell of old paperwork. But to Nathan, this place mattered more than any battlefield he had ever set foot on. Monday morning, precisely at 9 a.m., Nathan walked into courtroom 3. Carmina Hubert was beside him, her leather briefcase held firmly in her hand. Across the room, Emma sat with her attorney, a gray-haired man named Lawrence Diaz, his expression stern. Emma did not dare look at Nathan. Her face was pale, her eyes swollen from many sleepless nights. But Nathan felt no pity, only cold resolve. "All rise." Judge Margaret Harris entered, a woman in her early 60s, silver hair neatly pulled back, sharp eyes behind black-framed glasses. She took her seat and lightly struck the gavel. "This court will now hear the matter of temporary custody in Reynolds versus Reynolds. Counsel, you may proceed." Carmina stood first, her voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Nathan Reynolds, is requesting emergency temporary custody of his daughter, Lily Reynolds, age 8. The reason is simple. The child's current living environment is unsafe." She opened her briefcase and produced a stack of documents. "We submit medical reports from Dr. Carter, police records, and witness statements. All of this evidence demonstrates that Lily has suffered serious harm while living with her mother and Miss Reynolds' boyfriend." Judge Harris nodded and accepted the documents. Lawrence Diaz rose to respond. "Your Honor, my client does not deny that an unfortunate incident occurred. However, Mrs. Reynolds maintains that this was an isolated event and does not reflect her overall fitness as a mother. She has ended her relationship with Mr. Brandon Walsh immediately following the incident." "An isolated event?" Carmina interjected. "Your Honor, the bruises on Lily's body were not recent. Medical evidence shows prolonged harm lasting at least several weeks." Emma let out a quiet sob. Lawrence placed a hand on her shoulder, signaling her to remain calm. Judge Harris studied the medical photographs. Her expression hardened as she turned each page. Then she looked up. "Mrs. Reynolds, do you wish to speak?" Emma stood, trembling. Her voice was hoarse. "Your Honor, I'm sorry. I truly am. I didn't know Brandon would. I thought it was just discipline." "Discipline?" Judge Harris narrowed her eyes. "You call leaving these bruises on an 8-year-old child discipline?" Emma said nothing. Tears streamed down her face. Judge Harris continued, her tone firm. "Mrs. Reynolds, I have worked in family court for over 20 years. I have seen countless parents excuse harmful behavior under the word discipline. Let me be clear. There is no acceptable form of discipline that leaves a child in fear." She paused, looking directly at Emma. "One bruise is too many. One tear shed out of fear is too many. And in this case, your daughter endured far more than that." Emma collapsed back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Nathan watched, his chest tight with both sorrow and anger, sorrow for the woman he once loved, and anger for her failure to protect their child. Judge Harris turned to Nathan. "Mr. Reynolds, can you provide a safe and stable home for Lily?" Nathan stood, his voice firm. "Yes, Your Honor. I am fully prepared financially. I have appropriate housing, and I have a comprehensive care plan for my daughter. I have already contacted a child psychologist to help Lily through her trauma. You have been absent for 3 years. How can you be sure you can reconnect with your daughter?" Nathan met the judge's gaze directly. "Your Honor, I cannot change the past. I cannot reclaim the 3 years I lost. But I can promise this. From this moment forward, my daughter will be my top priority. I will be there whenever she needs me." Judge Harris nodded and made several notes. The tension in the room was palpable. Finally, she struck the gavel. After reviewing all evidence and testimony, the court rules as follows. The room fell silent. Nathan clenched his hands. Temporary custody of Lily Reynolds is granted to Mr. Nathan Reynolds. Mrs. Emma Reynolds is permitted supervised visitation for 2 hours per week. This order takes effect immediately and will be reviewed in 6 months. The gavel came down. Nathan scarcely remembered leaving the courtroom. He only knew that when he stepped into the sunlight outside, it felt as though an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Carmina stood beside him, smiling. "Congratulations, Mr. Reynolds. You won." "Not quite," Nathan said, shaking his head. "This is only the first step, but at least Lily is safe." Carmina nodded and extended her hand. "You're a good father. Lily is lucky to have you." Nathan shook her hand, emotions swelling inside him, not triumph, but relief, and a quiet belief that justice still existed. The battle was not over. 6 difficult months lay ahead. But today, Nathan had proven one thing. He was not alone. Justice stood with those who did what was right. And more importantly, Lily was now protected. When Nathan returned home, Lily was playing in the yard. She spotted him and ran toward him. "Dad, you're back. How did it go?" Nathan knelt and wrapped her tightly in his arms. "You're going to stay with me, sweetheart. From now on, you'll always be with me." Lily hugged him back, her voice soft. "I'm so happy." Nathan closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of his daughter in his arms. This was why he fought. This was the greatest victory of all, not on paper, but in the heart. 10 days after the court hearing, Nathan was preparing breakfast for Lily when his phone rang. Carmina Hubert. Her voice was more serious than usual. "Nathan, we have a problem." Nathan tightened his grip on the phone. "What is it?" "Brandon Walsh has filed an appeal, and his attorney, a man named Victor Crane, is going after your military record." Nathan felt his heart begin to race. His military record. Afghanistan. The memories he had tried so hard to bury. "What are they saying?" Carmina sighed. "They're claiming you suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and that you have a tendency to overreact in stressful situations. They're using the physical confrontation between you and Brandon that day as evidence." Nathan fell silent. Images from Afghanistan flooded his mind. Explosions, dust, the faces of comrades who never came home. He had thought he'd moved past it, but perhaps those scars never truly healed. "Nathan, are you still there?" "I'm here," he said hoarsely. "So what do they want?" "They're asking the court to reconsider the custody decision. They're arguing that Lily may not be safe living with you." Nathan's world began to spin. He had fought with everything he had to protect his daughter, and now his past, the years he sacrificed serving his country, was being turned into a weapon against him. "What do I need to do?" "We need a psychological evaluation, and we need to prove that you are fully capable of controlling your emotions." 2 days later, Nathan sat in the office of Dr. Sarah, a seasoned psychologist who specialized in working with veterans. The room was small and airy, softly lit with warm yellow light, the faint scent of lavender in the air. Dr. Sarah sat across from him. "Mr. Reynolds, I know this isn't an easy step, but if you want me to help you, you need to open up." Nathan looked down at his hands, hands that had once held a rifle, hands that had trembled in the Afghan nights. "I don't know where to begin. Start with the day you came home, the day you saw Lily again." Nathan told her everything. He spoke of his daughter's scream, of what he saw in her bedroom, of the rage that surged through him when he saw Brandon. Dr. Sarah listened without interrupting, nodding gently. "And after that?" she asked. "After that, I acted. I didn't think. I only knew I had to stop him." "Did you feel out of control?" Nathan paused. The question touched his deepest fear. I don't know. In that moment, all I saw was my daughter being terrified, and I had to protect her." Dr. Sarah made notes. "Your response was an instinctive reaction of a father. But did you experience similar situations in Afghanistan, moments when you had to act quickly, without time to think?" Nathan closed his eyes. The memories surged back, Explosions, shouting, the rush of adrenaline? Yes, many times. And now, do those memories still haunt you? Do you have nightmares, or feel anxious in crowded places? Nathan opened his eyes and looked straight at her. I have nightmares. Sometimes, but I don't let them control my life. That's important. Dr. Sarah set her pen down. Nathan, you need to understand something. PTSD does not mean you are dangerous. Many veterans live with it and are still wonderful fathers and husbands. But am I really safe for Lily? Nathan's voice trembled. Could what I brought back from the battlefield hurt my child? Dr. Sarah leaned forward, her gaze sincere. That question alone tells me you're a good father. Because you care, you question yourself, and that means you will always try to do what's best for your daughter. That evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Nathan sat alone in the living room, his laptop open to a local news site, and then he saw it. The headline read, Afghanistan veteran wins custody, but is it safe? The article was lengthy, quoting attorney Victor Crane and raising concerns about Nathan's mental health. There were reader comments as well. I'm not sure someone with PTSD should be raising a child alone. Veterans need support, but children's safety has to come first. Nathan read every line, feeling as though someone was squeezing his heart. He had given 3 years of his life to serve his country, and now that service was being twisted into a weapon against him. His phone buzzed. A message from Emma. Nathan, I saw the news. I'm sorry. I didn't know they'd go this far. But maybe we should reconsider. Nathan didn't finish reading it. He turned off the phone, stood up, and stepped out onto the balcony. The night wind was cold, sending a shiver through him. Was he being selfish? Was he putting Lily at risk because of his own psychological scars? The bedroom door opened. Lily stepped out, her eyes still heavy with sleep. Dad, why aren't you asleep? Nathan turned, forcing a small smile. I'm just thinking, sweetheart. Lily walked over and took his hand. Are you sad, Dad? Nathan looked down at his daughter's small face. Her clear eyes were full of trust, and in that moment, he understood. Not what others said, not the articles, not the comments. What mattered was what Lily felt that was the only truth that counted. He knelt and hugged her. I'm not sad when you're with me. I'll always be with you, Lily said, hugging him back. Because you protect me. Nathan closed his eyes, tears spilling over. Not tears of weakness, but of gratitude. Yes, he had scars. Yes, he had nightmares. But he also had love. He had resolve. And most of all, he had Lily's trust. And that was the greatest strength of all. Nathan stood up and guided her back to her room. Let's go to sleep now. Tomorrow, we'll face everything together. Lily nodded and smiled. And in her eyes, Nathan saw exactly what he needed most. Trust. On the third night after the article appeared, Nathan was awakened by soft crying coming from Lily's room. He jolted awake, jumped out of bed, and hurried to his daughter's room. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the small space. Lily was curled up on her bed, clutching her stuffed bear, her body trembling in waves. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Nathan went to her side and knelt down. Sweetheart, what's wrong? Lily opened her eyes, staring blankly as if looking into empty space. She whispered, I dreamed. Her voice caught. Nathan gently placed a hand on her shoulder. I'm here. You're safe. Lily threw her arms around him and sobbed. Nathan held her close, feeling her small body shaking in his arms. He softly stroked her hair and whispered, I won't let anyone hurt you anymore. I promise. But when Nathan started to get up to fetch a towel, he realized the bed sheets were wet. Lily had wet the bed. She looked down, her face flushing red with embarrassment. I'm sorry. Nathan stopped. In the military, he had been trained to react quickly, firmly, decisively. But this moment didn't require strength. It required gentleness. He sat back down beside her and hugged her tightly. You don't need to apologize. This is normal. But I'm 8 years old, Lily sobbed. I shouldn't. Sweetheart, Nathan interrupted softly. When I was little, it happened to me too. This is just your body telling you that you're worried, and that's okay. Lily looked up at him, a spark of hope in her eyes. Really? Really, Nathan said with a small smile. Now let's change the sheets together, okay? 20 minutes later, the bed had clean sheets. Lily, dressed in fresh pajamas, sat on the bed holding a mug of warm milk. Nathan sat beside her, watching as she took small sips. Dad, Lily asked quietly. Do I have to go to court? Nathan paused. This was what he feared most, Lily, having to face Brandon, Emma, and the judge's questions. Are you scared of going to court? Lily nodded, tears welling up again. I don't want to see Uncle Brandon anymore. I'm scared. Nathan set the mug aside and turned fully toward her. He gently held her small hands. Listen to me, sweetheart. If you have to go to court, I'll go with you. I'll sit right next to you, and I'll be your shield against everything. But what if they ask hard questions? Then you just tell the truth. You never need to be afraid of the truth, Nathan said, looking deeply into her eyes. And if there's any question you don't want to answer, you can tell me. I'll protect you. Lily looked at him. The worry was still there, but it had softened. Do you promise? I promise. Nathan held out his little finger. Pinky swear. Lily hooked her pinky around his, a small smile appearing on her lips, a sacred promise between father and daughter. The next morning, Nathan contacted Dr. Sarah. An appointment was scheduled for that afternoon, this time with Lily included. At the clinic, Lily sat on a small sofa, her feet swinging above the floor. Dr. Sarah sat across from her, her voice gentle. Lily, do you like to draw? Lily nodded shyly. Doctor. Sarah handed her a pad of paper and a box of crayons. Then while I talk with your dad, you can draw anything you like. Lily took them and began to draw. Nathan sat nearby, watching her. Doctor, Sarah continued, her tone professional yet warm. Nathan, Lily's symptoms are a natural response after trauma. Nightmares. Bedwetting, this is how her body processes overwhelming emotions. What can I do to help her? Nathan asked. Be patient, be reassuring, and let her know she's loved unconditionally. Dr. Sarah glanced at Lily drawing. She needs time to rebuild her sense of safety. Nathan nodded, silently vowing to do everything he could for his daughter. When the session ended, Lily handed her drawing to Dr. Sarah. It showed a small house, with two figures, one tall, one short, holding hands. A bright sun shone overhead. Is this you and your dad? Dr. Sarah asked. Lily nodded, smiling. Yes, I'm not scared anymore because Dad is here. Nathan looked at the drawing and felt his heart warm. That evening, Nathan decided to do something special. He prepared Lily's favorite dinner, spaghetti with tomato sauce and chocolate chip cookies. They ate together in the kitchen, candlelight flickering and creating a cozy atmosphere. Dad, Lily asked in the middle of the meal, why do you love me so much? Nathan paused. The simple question went straight to his heart. Because you're the most precious thing in my life. From the day you were born, I knew my life had meaning. Even when I wet the bed, Nathan chuckled softly. Even when you wet the bed, when you cry, when you make a mess, I love you just the same. Because love has no conditions. Lily fell quiet, thinking. Then she asked, were you scared in Afghanistan? The unexpected question startled Nathan. He had never told her about those years. Yes, I was scared. Then why did you stay there? Nathan set his fork down and looked her in the eyes. Because I wanted to protect the people I love, especially you. I thought that by being there, I was making the world safer for you. But now you're here. That's right, because I realized the safest place for you is right beside me. Lily smiled, the brightest smile Nathan had seen since coming home. I'm glad you came back, Dad. Nathan stood, walked over, and hugged her tightly. And I will never leave you again. On the morning of the appellate hearing, Nathan woke up at 5 o'clock. He stood by the window, watching the sunrise slowly emerge behind the treetops. His heart pounded not out of fear, but out of worry for Lily. Today, his daughter would face the greatest challenge of her young life. He walked into Lily's room and gently woke her. Lily opened her eyes and looked at him. Today's the day, isn't it? Nathan nodded and sat down on the edge of the bed. That's right, sweetheart. But remember what I promised, you won't be alone. I'll be right beside you. Lily sat up, hugging her stuffed bear tightly. There was worry in her eyes, but also a spark of determination Nathan had never seen before. I'll be brave, Dad. Nathan wrapped his arms around her, his voice thick with emotion. You already are very brave. Courtroom 3 was far more crowded this time. Reporters filled the back rows, cameras at the ready. Judge Harris sat at the bench, her expression stern. To the right sat Brandon Walsh beside his attorney, Victor Crane still wearing that same confident, arrogant look. Emma sat several rows behind, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Nathan and Lily sat next to Carmina. Nathan held Lily's hand tightly, silently passing strength to her. Judge Harris struck the gavel. This appellate hearing in Reynolds v. Reynolds, along with the criminal matter involving Brandon Walsh, is now in session. The court will hear testimony from the primary witness, Lily Reynolds. The tension in the room was palpable. Nathan felt Lily squeeze his hand. He leaned down and whispered, "You can do this. I believe in you." Lily stood up and walked slowly toward the witness stand. She looked smaller than ever in her simple white dress. But when the judge spoke, Lily's voice was clear. "My name is Lily Reynolds. I'm 8 years old." Carmina stood, her tone gentle. "Lily, can you tell the court what happened?" Lily looked down, then lifted her gaze and looked directly at Brandon. The man stared back at her, his face cold. But Lily did not shrink away. She took a deep breath and spoke. "Uncle Brandon, he came to our house a lot. At first, he was nice. But then he started yelling at me." "What did he yell at you for?" Carmina asked. "For everything. When I was loud, when I didn't listen. He said I was a bad kid." Lily's voice trembled slightly, but she went on. "Then one day, he grabbed my arm really hard. It hurt. I cried, but he didn't let go." Carmina presented the medical photographs. Lily looked at them and nodded. "These are the bruises he left." Brandon jumped to his feet. "That was just an accident. I never meant—" "Sit down," Judge Harris ordered. Brandon sat back down, his face flushed red. Carmina turned back to Lily. "Did you tell your mother?" Lily shook her head as tears welled up. "I was scared. Mom told me I had to respect Uncle Brandon. I thought if I said anything, she'd be mad at me." In the back row, Emma covered her face, her shoulders shaking. No one turned to look at her. "And what happened the day your father came home?" Carmina asked. Lily glanced at Nathan, her eyes lighting up. "That day, I was really scared. Uncle Brandon got angry because I spilled some water. He walked toward me and then Dad came in." She paused, her voice shaking but resolute. "Dad protected me. He made sure Uncle Brandon couldn't hurt me anymore." Carmina nodded and asked her final question. "Lily, is there anything you want to say to Brandon now?" The entire courtroom fell silent. Lily turned and looked straight at Brandon, her voice small but firm. "I don't want him to hurt me anymore, and I hope he never hurts any other children." The room erupted in murmurs. "Order!" Judge Harris struck the gavel. Victor Crane stood, trying to object. "Your Honor, the testimony of an 8-year-old child cannot—" "I've heard enough," Judge Harris interrupted. She turned to the court clerk. "Play the video evidence." The large screen lit up. It was footage from a neighbor's security camera, angled toward the window of Nathan's house. The image was grainy, but unmistakable. Brandon standing over Lily, his hand raised, Lily's body curled in fear. The courtroom stared at the screen in stunned silence. Emma broke down, sobbing. Brandon went pale. Judge Harris shut off the video and looked directly at Brandon. "Mr. Walsh, the court has more than sufficient evidence. You are hereby convicted of serious abuse against a minor. Your sentence is 3 years of supervised probation and a permanent restraining order prohibiting contact with any minor under the age of 18. Brandon sprang to his feet, his voice shaking. "No, this is a setup. Reynolds staged all of this. That's enough." Judge Harris slammed the gavel. "Remove him." 2 officers approached and escorted Brandon out of the courtroom. He continued shouting protests, but no one listened. Judge Harris then turned to Emma. "Mrs. Reynolds, due to your severe failure to protect your child, the court hereby terminates your custodial rights. You are granted supervised visitation for 1 hour per month, contingent upon demonstrated improvement." Emma collapsed into her seat, sobbing uncontrollably. This time, Nathan felt no pity, only relief. Full legal and physical custody of Lily Reynolds is awarded to Mr. Nathan Reynolds. Court is adjourned. The gavel came down. As they stepped outside the courthouse, Nathan lifted Lily into his arms and held her tightly. The bright sunlight made them blink, but it was the light of freedom, of victory. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck and whispered, "Did I do okay, Dad?" Nathan looked into her eyes, tears streaming down his face. "You did amazing. You're my hero." Carmina stood beside them, smiling. "You didn't save Lily, Nathan. Lily saved both of you." Nathan nodded. She was right. Lily's courage, an 8-year-old brave enough to speak the truth, had changed everything. They walked down the courthouse steps to the sound of applause. Martha was there, along with neighbors and even several parents from Oakwood Elementary. Nathan set Lily down and knelt to her eye level. "From now on, our life will be different. No more fear, no more worry, just happiness. Lily smiled, the brightest smile Nathan had ever seen. "I believe you, Dad." And in that moment, amid the blazing sunlight and the applause, Nathan knew they had won, not by force, but by love, courage, and trust. An absolute victory. 3 weeks after the court ruling, Nathan sat in the office of Colonel Morrison, his former commanding officer at Fort Jackson. The small room was filled with the familiar scent of coffee and paperwork. Photographs of past deployments lined the walls, reminders of the years Nathan had once lived as part of that world. Colonel Morrison, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a weathered face, looked at Nathan over his gold-rimmed glasses. "Reynolds, are you certain about this decision?" Nathan glanced down at the transfer request on the desk. Every line he had written carried the weight of a life-altering choice. "Yes, sir, I'm sure." Morrison sighed, folding his hands. "You understand what this means, don't you? You're giving up your path to promotion. You have an outstanding record, 3 years in Afghanistan, 2 medal recommendations. You could make major within 2 years. Nathan nodded. He knew all of that. "But sir, I've spent 3 years serving my country. Now my daughter needs me more." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then allowed a faint smile. "You're a fine soldier, Reynolds, but I suspect you're going to be an even better father." He signed the form. "Transfer approved. Starting next week, you'll be assigned to logistics here on base. Hours are 8 to 5. No travel. No deployments." Nathan stood and shook his hand. "Thank you, sir." Morrison held onto his hand for a moment longer. "Just remember this, the title of soldier never really leaves you. It just takes a different shape." That evening, Nathan returned home with mixed emotions. Part of him felt relief, no more worrying about distant deployments. Another part felt as though he were letting go of a piece of himself. Lily was sitting on the couch, reading. When she saw him, she jumped up. "Dad, you're home. How was today?" Nathan lifted her into his arms and smiled. "Very good. I've got some good news." "What is it?" "Starting next week, I'll be working closer to home. I'll pick you up from school every day." Lily's eyes widened. "Really? Every day?" "Every day," Nathan repeated. "And every evening, I'll be home for dinner with you." Lily wrapped her arms tightly around his neck, her voice full of joy. "I'm so happy." Nathan held her close, feeling the warmth of her small body. In that moment, he knew he had made the right choice. That night, after Lily had gone to bed, Nathan sat alone in his study. He opened the cabinet and took out a small wooden box, the one that held his military keepsakes. Inside were medals, insignia, and photographs of his fellow soldiers. Nathan picked up one photo himself, and Marcus standing side by side in the Afghan desert, smiling despite the dust and smoke behind them. The phone rang. "Marcus." "Nathan, I heard you transferred." "Yeah," Nathan said, setting the photo down. "News travels fast. Do you regret it?" Nathan paused. "Regret? No. A sense of loss? Perhaps. I don't regret it, but I will miss those days." Marcus chuckled softly. "You know, I've always been a little jealous of you. You have Lily, a reason to live, a reason to fight. All I've ever had is the army. You'll find your reason too." "Maybe." Marcus hesitated, then added, "But seriously, Nathan, you did the right thing. A good soldier knows when to fight. A great soldier knows when it's time to come home." After the call ended, Nathan sat quietly, letting those words settle deep inside him. His first week in logistics passed uneventfully. He handled paperwork, managed supply inventories, trained new recruits. The work lacked drama, but it offered something far more valuable: time. Every afternoon at 3:30, Nathan drove to Oakwood Elementary. He stood outside the gate among other parents, waiting for Lily, and every time he saw her run toward him, backpack bouncing, his heart warmed. "Dad!" Lily ran into his arms. "I got a perfect score in math today." "That's fantastic." Nathan lifted her up. "How about we celebrate tonight?" On the way home, they stopped at the grocery store to pick up ingredients for dinner. Lily chose vegetables. Nathan picked out the meat. They laughed, debated what to cook, and teased each other. Ordinary moments, quiet, simple, and deeply meaningful. 5 years later, it was June, and summer had arrived earlier than usual. The backyard of 47 Maple Street had been completely transformed. A lush green lawn, a wooden swing hanging from the branch of a large oak tree, and a small corner set aside for a fire pit. Nathan sat on a wooden chair, a warm cup of coffee in his hand, looking toward the softly burning fire. The flames danced, casting a gentle golden glow into the summer night. "Dad, look!" Lily, now 12 years old, noticeably taller, her long hair tied back in a ponytail, was holding a marshmallow skewer. Beside her were 3 friends from school: Anna, Jake, and Sophie. "What are you up to there?" Nathan asked with a smile. "I'm creating the perfect marshmallow," Lily said, carefully turning the skewer. "Golden brown, not burned, not sticky." Scout, their 2-year-old golden retriever, whom Nathan and Lily had adopted 3 years earlier, was stretched out nearby, his tail wagging lightly every time Lily laughed. Nathan watched the scene, his heart full. 5 years ago, he never would have imagined a moment of peace like this. "Mr. Reynolds," Jake, a curly-haired boy with a face full of freckles, called out, "do you want to roast marshmallows too?" Nathan stood and walked toward the fire. "Of course, but you'll have to teach me how to do it properly, Jake." Jake grinned proudly. "It's easy. You just have to be patient and not rush." Nathan sat down by the fire and took the skewer Jake handed him. Lily sat beside her father and rested her head on his shoulder. "Do you remember the first time we roasted marshmallows?" she asked. "I do," Nathan laughed. "You burned 4 in a row. That's because you didn't teach me the right way," Lily protested, her voice full of amusement. The children burst into laughter. Scout barked excitedly, as if he wanted to join in. Voices and laughter echoed through the night, blending with the crackling of the fire. Nathan looked around, bright faces, innocent smiles. No fear, no anxiety, just simple happiness. An hour later, when the children had played their fill, they gathered around the fire to listen to Nathan tell a story. It was about a brave knight, not one who fought dragons, but one who battled himself to become a better person. Lily listened intently, her eyes shining in the firelight. She knew the story was really about her father. And then, Nathan continued in his warm, steady voice, the knight realized that the greatest victory wasn't defeating his enemies, it was protecting what he loved. Sophie, a small girl with a gentle voice, asked, "Was the knight happy, Mr. Reynolds?" Nathan looked at Lily and smiled. Yes, the knight was very happy, because he found the most important thing of all, a home to come back to. Lily squeezed her father's hand tightly. When Lily's friends were picked up by their parents, Nathan and Lily cleaned up the yard. Scout ran around with a skewer in his mouth. The fire had burned down, leaving only glowing embers. Lily poured water over the fire, sending wisps of smoke into the air. Nathan stood beside her, watching. "Did you have a good time today?" he asked. "I did." Lily turned and smiled. "I love days like this. Peaceful, warm. So do I." They walked into the house together. Scout ran ahead, tail wagging wildly. The house at number 47 was different now. Fresh white walls, family photos everywhere, laughter echoing through it every day. While Lily went to shower, Nathan sat alone in the living room, looking out the window. The sky was filled with stars, the moon shining brightly. He thought back to 5 years earlier, those difficult early days, the sleepless nights filled with worry, the moments when he wondered whether he was strong enough to be a good father. Now, he knew the answer. Lily came downstairs in her pajamas, her hair still damp. She sat beside him. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "I'm thinking about how far we've come." Lily was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Do you have any regrets?" Nathan looked at her, surprised. "Regrets? No." "Why do you ask?" "Because I know you gave up a lot to be with me. Your career, opportunities for promotion." Nathan placed his hand gently on her head and stroked her hair. "Sweetheart, I didn't give anything up. I just chose what mattered more, and nothing matters more than you." Lily looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes, not tears of sadness, but of gratitude. "I'm really lucky to have you as my dad." Nathan hugged her. "No, I'm the lucky one to have you." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Nathan stepped out onto the balcony. The cool night breeze carried the scent of jasmine. He looked up at the star-filled sky, feeling a deep, quiet peace. 5 years earlier, he had been a soldier returning from war, carrying scars, both physical and emotional. He had fought not with weapons, but with love, perseverance, and faith. He had learned that true strength does not lie in fists, but in the heart. True victory is not defeating an enemy, but protecting the ones you love. And most importantly, he had learned that war only truly ends when you find peace. Peace does not mean the absence of hardship. It means knowing that no matter what happens, you have a home to return to, someone to love, and a reason to keep going. Nathan smiled and looked toward Lily's bedroom. A small nightlight still glowed. Lily always kept it on because it made her feel safe. And in that moment, Nathan knew he had won. Not against Brandon, not against Emma, not against the system. He had won against himself, against fear, against the past, against the shadows within. And the reward? It was this moment, sitting in a warm home, knowing his daughter was sleeping safely inside. It was the quiet campfire. It was simple, priceless happiness. Nathan stepped back inside, turned off the balcony light, and quietly entered Lily's room. He sat beside her bed, looking at her peaceful, sleeping face. "I love you," he whispered, "and I promise I'll always be here." He gently kissed Lily on the forehead, turned off the nightlight, and stepped out. The war was over, and a new life, a life filled with love and hope, had begun. The story of Nathan and Lily is a reminder that sometimes what we need is not to erase the past, but the courage to face it, to face the scars within ourselves, to listen to the cries for help hidden behind silence, and to understand that protecting a vulnerable life is also a way of saving our own. Like a soldier returning from the battlefield, Nathan found new meaning in life, not in medals or glory, but in a small house on Maple Street, where a little girl needed safety and love. And in protecting Lily, Nathan himself found the peace he once believed was lost forever. Every day, there are still children suffering in silence. Every day, there are adults struggling with the past and searching for a reason to keep going. And sometimes, fate brings them together not by chance, but because both are in need of redemption. If this story has touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel to continue walking alongside stories of fatherhood, healing, and hope. Because sometimes, a single story is enough to change how we see the world, and perhaps even change a life. Please share this video with those you love. The more people understand that violence and trauma are not always loud or easy to recognize, the more children can be protected in time. And if you or someone you know are going through the darkest days of life, remember this: you are not alone. There is always someone willing to pause, to listen, and to stand guard beside you. Peace will come. You deserve to be safe. You deserve to be loved. Never remain silent in the face of evil, and never give up hope.